The 70th inductee in the Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame will be presented by Walt Wenthold, former assistant coach at Fridley, Minnesota High School. Walt.
First of all, I guess I'd like to say how impressed I am by this gathering, because Joe asked me to come down and say a few words at his induction ceremony. I never realized all the people that were so big in wrestling to be in one room. It's an honor for me to talk about Joe Frank. He is not only was an outstanding wrestling coach, but more so, I'd like to say a few words about Joe as a person, because a lot of people know what a good wrestling coach Joe was and what his credentials are. They're all in this paper, and I'm just going to run through them quickly. If you haven't read the paper here, I'm sitting with the publisher, he had to call that to my attention. Joe was a Iowa High School state champion, and I noticed by the scrapbooks I saw today that he had a real tough time in the state champion. He had 2 falls and a 10-0 victory. He was captain of the 1964 Iowa State wrestling team. It was second in the NCAA. Joe he's already a member of the Minnesota Hall of Fame for all the things he did in Minnesota. Probably should be inducted into the Oregon Hall of Fame, because Joe went to Oregon out of college, stayed there 3 years, and won 3 state championships in Reedsport, Oregon. So he has really spread his talent around. In 1969, Joe came to Fridley and started a 17-year coaching career that was amazing. In 17 years, he won 227 dual meets with only 31 losses. This was in an area of Minnesota wrestling that was very difficult. Extremely good teams. 2 of the coaches that we competed against are here tonight. They'll vouch for the fact that this was no walkover area. 10 conference championships in an extremely difficult conference. In fact, in Minnesota at one time we had 1 class, and there were only 12 champions. And 1 year, 5 of the state champions came out of our conference. You know, winning 10 out of 17 is not an easy thing to do. He had won the region 10 times, won the state 3 times, and qualified for the state 9 times, and finished in the top 6 9 times. So Joe has a record in Minnesota that deserves this honor. He also has an honor in Minnesota that will never be duplicated. In Minnesota in 1975, we went for the last year that we had 1 class. After that, it was always 2 classes. Now it's 3 classes. We had 1 class, and it was the first year that we had a dual meet champion, where we wrestled everybody in dual meet. And that year, Fridley High School won the dual meet championship for the entire state. Next year there were classes, so there's never going to be another state champion. That only is the champion of 1 group. Joe's success really, I think, had to do with conditioning. Fridley kids were always conditioned as good as anybody in the division. And part of that was because Joe believed in running. He was a runner himself, and he made our kids run. Fridley High School sits on a lake. It's about 2.5 miles around the lake. And in the middle of the winter, anytime before practice, kids would go down the locker room, put on their sweatshirts, put on whatever they had, and they would run the lake. 2.5 miles. 0 degrees, 80 degrees, it didn't make any difference. They had to run the lake. And that was because of Joe's influence. One of Joe's favorite sayings is to the wrestlers that everybody is a coward when he's tired. And that really is true. Okay, Joe the person. Now, there's other statistics I could give. They're all in that paper. But nobody really realized what a very individual Joe is. He started taking up, and his wife Janet, started taking up stained glass. So these beautiful things in stained glass. I wish we would have brought a couple of pieces along. I can't imagine how nice they are. Joe decided that he would like to play the guitar. So Janet used to tell me that Joe would come home from wrestling practice and he would sit in the living room for hours plucking on the guitar. And he became very good at it. He plays the guitar, he plays the banjo, he plays the mandolin. He can do bluegrass, he can do old time, whatever. So he does stained glass, he plays the guitar, and then he's a dancer. Joe and Janet used to go to all kinds of dances, and I think maybe still do, I'm not sure anymore, but and that carried over to wrestling practice, because one of the things we would do in the winter, we had a wrestling room, and Joe would have the girls' gymnastics team come down to the wrestling room. He would put polka music on, and the wrestlers would dance with the girls' gymnastics. And they didn't get out of there until everybody lost about 10 pounds. Because it was about 90 degrees, and they poke it, and they poke it, and they poke it, until everybody was down to weight, including the girls. Joe is an excellent horseshoe player. He's won many horseshoe tournaments. He does that in his spare time when he's not doing all these other things. He also is a long-distance biker. Our faculty used to go on a fishing boat, still does, in fact, but to go on a fishing trip to a big lake north of Minneapolis, about 100 miles. And Joe goes along always. And one year, I was driving and pulling my boat, so I was going to go over to pick up Joe, and he comes out, he's got a rod and a reel and a tackle box, and then he's got a bicycle. So he throws the bicycle in my boat. And in his bird watching book, that's another thing he does, is he watches birds. He can identify anything that flies. So we go up to Mille Lacs and we do our fishing trip, and then the last morning, when we're going to come home, we're getting ready to leave, and Joe says, I'm going to go home on the bike. So it's 100 miles, it's a big deal. So we pack up and we get everything settled up, all our finances in order and everything, and on the way home we stop for pretty leisurely breakfast. And what Joe had asked me, he said, would you stop at my house and drop off my fishing equipment? I said, sure, I'll do that. So we stop on the way back, we have breakfast. I drop off a couple other guys who were riding with us. So I go over to Joe, and I'm like, drop off his fishing equipment. He walks out of the house. He beat us home, 100 miles. So he's ridden the Cresco at night also. From Minneapolis, he's ridden the Cresco at night. So he does that. But probably his greatest achievement, as far as I'm concerned, is his wood carving. Joe is a master wood carver. You cannot believe the things that Joe does and carves, and Janet paints. I wish we would have brought some of the things along, at least some pictures, because Joe can really carve. And I am so impressed. I keep telling him he should sell it, but he won't sell anything. The other thing, he goes fishing to Alaska. He's gone fishing to Alaska a number of times. He caught a 60-pound halibut, about half of his weight. And not only that, he's got a good heart, because he volunteered to go to Guatemala to build houses for the poor. Okay, two more quick things about Joe. I have a connection with Cresco because Joe knew I was a pheasant hunter. And so he said, let's go down to Cresco and we'll stay at my mother's in Cresco here. And I'll show you some good pheasant hunting spots. So we come down here, and Joe doesn't want to buy an Iowa license. So he doesn't carry a gun. He just walks along with me and my dog. So we're walking along in this fence row, and all of a sudden my lab gets real excited, and I can tell that he's going to go into this fence line and scare off this bird, so I'm all ready to shoot. And all of a sudden Joe takes a running leap, jumps into the bushes, comes out with a rooster pheasant. He caught the pheasant. I didn't even have to shoot. One last story. In Minneapolis in the spring, they have a big sportsman show in the Minneapolis Auditorium. And one year, Don Myers, who's in the audience here, and many of you know from his refereeing the NCAA for years and years. He was our assistant principal. And Don and I go down to the sportsman show, and one of the things they had as kind of a gimmick was they have this great big Siberian tiger, weighs almost 400 pounds, and the thing is declawed. But they try to get somebody to come out of the audience and get in the ring with this tiger and wrestle the tiger. Well, the whole shtick is that the guy stands there, and this big monster tiger leaps up, puts his paws on the shoulders, and knocks the guy down and stands over. You know, and the tiger's been trained to do that. He weighs almost 400 pounds. So Don got the brilliant idea that since we were the Fridley Tigers, that it would be a nice thing to have this guy, and Don was one of the people that put on the sportsman show, that they have this tiger come out to Fridley, and he would do it at an assembly in front of all the students. And so then, what do you expect? We said, how about Joe wrestling the tiger? So he consented, and here we got this, stands are full, and the guy comes out with the big tiger, and got a big strong leash on it. The tiger's declawed. And Joe, all 140 pounds, walks out there, you know, and the tiger leaps up and puts his paws on Joe's shoulder. And knowing Joe, he grabs one leg, hits the tiger with a headlock, and throws it on its back. Now, you want to see one angry cat. And now, I've done a lot of officiating, and I would have had to disqualify the tiger because he bit Joe on the head. True blood. That cat was not used to being fired on his back. You ever seen a little cat on his back, what they can do when they're upset? You see the corner-on tiger that gets headlocked. Okay, I'm ready. There's a lot of other Joe Frank stories, and a lot of them I couldn't tell here. But I would just say that Joe deserves everything. He's the most interesting and varied person that I've ever met. He's probably the toughest, physically and mentally, that I've ever met. Nobody in our wrestling room would go with Joe. I don't care what weight he is. Joe certainly deserves to be in this Hall of Fame, even though this is a very prestigious Hall of Fame.
Tell you that Walt is an excellent storyteller, but you probably know that already. You know, he was so good at telling stories about past wrestlers and past matches, and he remembers names for the last 30 years, that he could captivate our wrestlers and keep their attention, and they listen to him just like he was a minister speaking to the choir. But kids really enjoyed it, and you can see why. Well, Walt does have a wife, you know, and I'm glad he didn't introduce her, so I can introduce her, but we're close, and they're good friends, and Sandy, why don't you stand up? We appreciate you being here. Sandy. I could say one other thing about Walt. You know, he was a great baseball coach, and played softball probably until he was in his 50s. And of course, he's a wrestling coach, and he's an excellent golfer, and a super teacher, math teacher he was. But you ought to talk to him, if you're interested in any of those things, you know, like golf or baseball or wrestling, you ought to talk to this guy because he's got tons of stories. In fact, I asked him about the time, this was just last fall, when he drove back to Minneapolis after being down in Iowa hunting, and his dog met up with a skunk. So he had to throw the dog in the back seat of the car, and after this dog had been fighting with a skunk and got sprayed, and drive back to Minneapolis with it. So ask him how that went. Well, like Walt said, I'm a little overwhelmed by this whole thing because it hasn't sunk in yet that I belong here, but I'm really happy to be here. And it's great to be back in Cresco, my hometown. You know, no matter where I went years ago, Oregon or people had heard about Cresco in wrestling circles. And it makes you very proud to be a part of that, and now to be inducted with the great Iowa coaches, and even my high school coach and my college coach, Chris Flanagan and Harold Nichols, are charter members in this organization. It's such an honor to be inducted in this with, of course, my nephews who are, you know, just Mr. Everything, Jim and Joe. And in my hometown, with a lot of my classmates, and a lot of my teammates from Iowa State, and other friends, it's a wonderful, unbelievable feeling. So I want to thank you all for being here and supporting this event. You know, I sent out a little flyer to a lot of my classmates and teammates and made them aware of this, even though I knew a lot of them couldn't make it. And of course, you know, the turnout has been quite spectacular. And I've been accused here of giving away tickets, you know, actually buying tickets just to get someone to come. But I want you to know I did not do that. I'm too cheap to do that. But I must say this is a good-looking audience. I recognize a lot of those ears. But it's also a great day for Cresco and the whole community to shine and show their stuff. I've heard a couple people say that I didn't realize Cresco was such a neat town and a clean town, and this whole event here is absolutely unbelievable. But I do have some bad news, because I typed up my speech on the computer, and I've been working on it for a while, and I had about a 2-hour speech, you know, and I stored it on the computer. Then I went to retrieve it, and I couldn't find it. So then you know, what's really bad about that is my wife wouldn't even help me find it. But I got lucky, and I put some things together here on the way down, and then at the motel, you know, I met this guy from Fridley. And he's a guy that, his name is Ron, and he's a good friend from Fridley. He's a wrestling fan, and he's a kind of a self-appointed weatherman, Mr. Everything. So I asked him, I said, Ron, it's 85 degrees today. Winter must be over. Can I put my long underwear away? Ron said, Joe, he says, you can't put your long underwear away. There's 30 days left in the snow season in Minnesota, and I guarantee you it'll snow again, so don't do that. So, you know, Ron is a real wrestling fan. He goes to all the university matches. And I asked Ron, I said, how are the Minnesota fans feeling? You know, because the University of Iowa beat the Gophers 3 times this year. And Iowa State beat the Gophers once. So we were 0-4 against the Hawkeye State. And so I said, how are the fans feeling about all this, Ron? He says, Ron says, Gopher fans don't have any hard feelings for the Hawkeye State. In fact, he said, why don't you thank them for us? But then Ron, I met him down here, you know, and I didn't understand why he was down here. And I said, Ron, what are you doing down here? He said, well, I had to come down here and see Cresco, Iowa, because I wanted to see the hometown of Gary Kurtlemeyer. You know, here's Gary Kurtlemeyer, a Cresco boy that was a couple times state champion, goes to University of Iowa, and he's an All-American football player and a national champion wrestler. He says, I had to see his hometown. I wanted to see it. I said, that's fine, but he said, but Joe, did I miss something? He says, I was looking for a coffee shop in town here, Starbucks. And I said, I couldn't even buy a cup of coffee in Cresco. I said, yeah, well, that's probably true, but did you see all those hog farms on the way to town? And well, he said, yeah, but I wanted to come down here to Cresco, Iowa, and see where Harold Nichols and Don Nichols grew up, two guys that were national champions at University of Michigan. And Harold Nichols, of course, is my college coach at Iowa State. He said, I had to see where the hometown of these two guys. But he says, is there something I missed? He says, I wanted to buy something, and there was no Target, there was no Kmart. He says, I said, yeah, but did you see like the Turkey River out here, how beautiful it is? And, yeah, he says, I know, but I had to come to Cresco to see where the hometown of Dr. Borlaug. Yeah, I said, Dr. Borlaug was a Cresco wrestler that went to the University of Minnesota, and was a scholar athlete. He, of course, wins the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for his work in agriculture. University wrestler, still goes to the university matches, and proud to tell people that he's from Cresco. He was a wrestler, and he appreciates what the lessons he learned through wrestling. But is there something I missed here? He says, I wanted to, Cresco doesn't even have a McDonald's or anything. Yeah, I know, but did you see up on Main Street there, on North Elm there, how pretty those elm trees are, or those maple trees are? They're gorgeous. Yeah, he says, I know, but I wanted to see the hometown of Chris Flanagan. This great Iowa coach that was my high school coach, and such a great guy. Had 37 state champions teams, state championship teams. But he said, Cresco, there's something missing. Did I miss something? Well, I said, probably not, but did you see that we have 2 stoplights in town now? Years ago, we only had 1. Yeah, but he says, I had to see Cresco, Iowa, because that's where Dave Bartelma was the head wrestling coach, and then went on to become the wrestling coach at the University of Minnesota, and is considered to be the father of amateur wrestling in Minnesota. I had to see where this guy came from, Cresco, Iowa. But there's no shopping malls in Cresco. Yeah, I said, I know, but did you see how nice the school looks? Yeah, but he said, wanted to see where Gene Liebert, his hometown, Cresco, Iowa, I wanted to see Dale Hansen. These guys were national champions at the college level. Tom Peckham, two-time champion. I'm going to say one other thing about Tom Peckham right here. You know, Tom Peckham and my brother Omer right here and Don Henry were state champions from Cresco the same year. And I don't think they've been together since they did this in '61. You know, Tom Peckham was a phenomenal wrestler. Tom, raise your hand. Omer told me Tom was a 3-time high school state champion and a 1-time hog riding champion. Because when Tom Peckham was a freshman, the week before the state tournament, he and my brother went out and were riding these 200-pound hogs in the hog lot and through the snowbanks when it was about 10 below, and they got all sweaty and dirty and wet, and Tom Peckham caught the flu, and then he loses to this kid from Maquoketa, I think. So I don't think he even denied that. But I have another guy over here that denied a story that I told him. His name is Gordon Hassman. I told him, I got a picture, Gordy, of you losing to Don Henry.
I lost to Cresco wrestler.
All right, watch this. Stand up, Don. This is my friend Don Henry. Stand up. They were at the same weight one time. And this guy beats that guy 2-0 in the state finals. I really appreciate Gordy being here because he's a great guy and a teammate at Iowa State. And you know, I got one story I can tell you about him. He could not make this team in Iowa State because Virgil Carr was there, and that's 157. I think that was his best weight. But he couldn't make the team, so he didn't get to wrestle where he wanted to. But so Nick puts him up to 167. It's kind of a fill-in, you know, best we had. And Gordy Hassman here goes out and wins the national championship, and Virgil Carr is sitting in the bleachers. And, you know, I got a lot of Iowa State friends here that were, you know, Cresco had a pipeline with Iowa State. I would think maybe a dozen or more of us went to Iowa State. Don Henry here is about the only guy that went to the University of Minnesota. And he was a school psychologist up there. And by the way, this guy here is a relative of Dr. Norman Borlaug, right here. This guy right here. His mother, I think he said, was a first cousin. Don has written numerous articles about Dr. Borlaug as a person and his work and what all he's done. So thank you, Don, for that. But getting back to the Cresco wrestlers that have gone to Iowa State, there had to be a dozen of them. You know, of course, they all didn't make it. And a lot of those guys are here tonight from Cresco. Don Webster was one of my heroes. Don, put up your hand. He's a Cresco boy. I think Richard Spons, but I'm not sure if he is. How about, we have a couple guys that done very well. Dr. Jim Grover, he's a veterinary. Put up your hand, Jim. Jim, you know, I gotta tell you one story about this too. Jim had a car, so all my friends had cars because I never had a car. And Jim had a car, so he took me to the prom and stuff. And, with that, and then, you know, in college, I lived with Don Webster, and he had a car, so I was all set. And then I married my wife here, Janet, and she had a car. And sometimes I get accused of marrying her because she had a car, but and Lee Johnson, put up your hand, Lee. Another guy that became a veterinary, a 2-time state champion here and a wrestler at Iowa State. Danny Wade, a couple-time state champion. Are you here, Dan? He's the county engineer here for Howard County, I think, isn't he? And you know, Cresco, Ron didn't say he had to come to Cresco to see the hometown of the Gibbons' mother. Didn't do that? But, you know, the Gibbons boys here, their mother, my sister, of course, grew up in Cresco. And Ron, why don't you stand up, Ron? Ron here is he lives in Fridley. Stand up, Ron Ackerman. He's the guy that was a friend. Well, I got a little sidetracked there, but I too, I wished I could say that this is the day we have all been waiting for. You know, like, I wanted this pretty bad and expected it. Well, I can assure you, that was the last thing, and this is the last thing on my mind. And when Don Gooder mentioned this to me, I was kind of speechless and kind of didn't know what to say. I didn't even want to tell anybody because I didn't want them to think that I was tooting my horn or anything, but it was a complete surprise. Maybe that's why it's so enjoyable. I'd like to thank the Awards Selection Committee and the Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame Board of Directors for this honor, and I'll be eternally grateful. I don't like to mention names, but there's a few people that I've talked to that I think are instrumental in putting on this event. And those are Jerome Grushka. Jerome? He was a Cresco wrestler here about my time. Chuck Curtis, another guy that I talked to about this event. And probably the person that does most of the work is Cindy Butekoffer. CNN, did she give you that CNN thing when you called her? I think she works for an insurance company too. And Don Gooder. Don Gooder has to be one of the all-time great wrestling fans. He goes all over to watch wrestling. Don, thank you. And thank these people for their work in hosting this event. And I want to thank my wife and family for being here. We truly have been blessed with a wonderful family. That, of course, is something money can't buy. I married my high school sweetheart and classmate, Janet. We've been married 40 years. We have 3 children. And of course, she deserves part of this award. You know, our wedding reception was right here. Right here in this room, 40 years ago. And the dinner cost $1.25. Sit-down dinner. And I don't know who pays for that. Who pays for that? Okay, and I want to introduce my children. And I think it's safe to say the kids get their compassionate side from their mom and their work ethic from their dad. So our daughter Jody here, stand up Jody, and her husband Scott. She was born in Ames. It tells you a little bit about my journey. Our son John and his wife Lisa. He was born in Reedsport, Oregon. John is a serious runner and biker. Our daughter Jill. She's a graduate student at Southern Mississippi and she's home for this event. In fact, just one comment there is that when she told her friends that her dad was going to be inducted into the Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame, their reaction was, "Oh, did your dad wrestle for the WWF?" parents were equally proud of them all. And you know, I just got a call a moment ago about this guy that said he couldn't make it, and I know he's a little shy, but maybe you'd like to hear the story anyway. His name was Charles Johnson. I give this guy credit for introducing me to wrestling. He was a farmer that lived down the road and was a bachelor. His brother wrestled for New Hampton High School, and so he always went to watch his brother wrestle. I'm talking 51, 52. And he always took me along because he wanted somebody to go with him. So we went into all the Northeast Iowa schools, and of course that was where the good wrestling was. I learned right away that it was okay to be a wrestler. And to be a good wrestler was a big deal. You know, the gyms were packed, standing room type thing. And then when I got home, I couldn't wait to try those moves out on my brother, Homer. I remember, you know, watching Gary Kurtelmeyer wrestle in high school. The guy that was the champion, was the wrestling coach at the University of Iowa. And you know that, I got to tell you that this story too, and I think it's true, that when Gary was a senior in high school, Gene Frank was the JV heavyweight because he couldn't beat Gary. Gene Frank was my cousin. He called me the other day, thinking he was answering. He lives in Burnsville, but I got him in Phoenix, Arizona, on the 7th green, and he was ready to putt. He said, "Joe, I'd love to be there, but I'm sorry that I can't." Well, Gene Frank was the JV heavyweight at Cresco because he couldn't beat Gary. Gary goes to the University of Iowa. Gene goes to Iowa State. Gary is the national champion, and Gene gets third. And he never makes his high school team, varsity. Well, Charles wished he was here, but you know, he played several instruments. And he told me he played in this band for 55 years. This is the kind of guy, he didn't smoke, he didn't drink. And whenever we went someplace, we drove about 35 miles an hour. And he was in the Marines. He got an 8th grade education, was in the Marines, joined the Marines during World War II. And this guy is so shy and so humble, and I'm sure that's why he didn't want to be here and let me tell you about him. But he was on the island of Iwo Jima when the Marines raised the flag, the American flag, in Iwo Jima for taking the island. You know, the famous Marines pushing up the flag in Iwo Jima. He was there. So he's my hero, but he's not here. Let's give him a hand anyway. And about a month ago, I was at the University of Madison for the Big Ten Wrestling Tournament. And I was talking to this guy that is here tonight. I asked him to come. He's a Cresco boy. He's in his 80s. He drove down here by himself. But here's his story. He lived on a farm in the western part of the county. At the end of the 8th grade, he graduates from this one-room school. And his dad says, "You've got enough education. I want you to stay home and help me on the farm." He stays home for 4 more years on the farm and helps his dad. And this is in the 30s, like maybe 35, in the Depression. And then he comes into contact with a guy named Hub Edmondson, who owns the clothing store here in Fridley. And he convinces Garth, he owns a clothing store in Cresco. But he convinces Garth to come to high school and wrestle. So Garth enrolls in Cresco High School as a 19-year-old freshman. 18 or 19. So he's in, and he lives with Hub Edmondson. And Chris Flanagan, of course, is the coach. And so, everything is going well, except next year as a sophomore, he gets drafted I'm not sure if he gets drafted or if he enlists. So now he's in World War II. So he finishes high school in the military, and he takes these correspondence classes sent to him by Don Nichols, who is Harold Nichols' brother, you know, the national champion from the University of Michigan. He finishes high school then in the military, and then when he gets out, he plans on going to the University of Michigan where the Nichols boys were. Except, he goes up to Minneapolis, visiting one weekend, and he meets up with Dave Bartelma, the Cresco coach, now the university coach. Dave Bartelma convinces him, you should come to the University of Minnesota and wrestle. And the trick here is, the second semester starts on Monday. He's up there for the weekend. So he enrolls on Monday and goes to school the first week and wrestles his first match on Saturday. And he wrestles Rummy Macius, who was from the University of Iowa and a Big Ten champion. Another little twist here. A lot of you people from Cresco know George Champlin. Well, George Champlin then is a big executive at Pillsbury in Minneapolis. George Champlin is from Cresco, but works for Pillsbury. George Champlin was Garth told me was the smallest quarterback to ever play for the University of Minnesota. Really good athlete. But now he's at Pillsbury. He tells Garth, as soon as you finish school, I'll have a job for you at Pillsbury. In the meantime, Garth wants to be a teacher, and he takes the coaching job at Anoka High School. And he was the coach for 9 years and then went into administration. So I thought this guy, this is a Cresco native that I wanted you to hear this story, and I really appreciate him coming down here. And can you imagine going to Madison, Wisconsin in your 80s to watch the Big Ten wrestling tournament? What a guy. Garth Lappin, put up, that's him. You know, I'm just going to say something about my coaches. I, of course, had two of the best, Chris Flanagan and Harold Nichols. Both are charter members of this organization and are in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, but both guys, you know, understood that wrestling was a numbers game, and I've told this to a few people, but I'm sure they have heard this, but you put a lot of student athletes into a room, you shut the door, you crank up the heat. I'm talking about a few years ago, maybe, I don't know if you crank up the heat anymore, but shut the door, crank up the heat, show them the basics of the sport, the rules, and the survivors are going to be pretty good wrestlers. And you know, that sounds kind of crude and maybe inhuman, but that's how good wrestlers are made. And that was true at Iowa State, it was true in Cresco. They just show you the basics, they get a lot of tough guys, and they make each other better. And that's why in wrestling you see so many wrestling families, brothers, that are good wrestlers. They make each other tougher if you're athletic, and you compete in everything. My brother and I compete climbing to the peak of the barn, or see who could load the manure spreader faster, you know, whatever. So both guys understood that part of it. I want to tell you a couple things about my two jobs that I had. My first job, they had some things in common, I think, that you can appreciate. In '64, when I went to Reedsport, Oregon, I took over for Chuck Patton. Chuck Patton was the coach there, and he came back to Northern Iowa to be the head wrestling coach at Northern Iowa, his alma mater. And when I went to Fridley, I took over for another legend, Don Myers, in '68. these were not big schools. You know, they might have been, Reedsport might have been 50 in a class, and Fridley had more students, but the district was 5 miles long and 3 miles wide. That's not very big. 5 miles long and 3 miles, that's the Fridley School District. It's the kind of thing that, you know, if you probably knew in advance, you'd say, I don't want to go there. And both programs were extremely successful. Chuck Patton had just won the state title. Don Meyer's teams had just won the state title. Now I know what you're already thinking is, hell, I could have been a good wrestling coach if I go to those kind of programs. But of course you know that we won 3 more titles. Well, Don Meyer's teams, I should say this, his teams won 60 matches in a row, and this is back in the early 60s, 60 matches in a row when you only wrestled 8 or 10 times a year. So he went for about 5 years and never lost a dual meet, or 6 years maybe. Of course, we won 3 more state titles at each school. And this might be a key for you coaches that taught and coached both schools. There's a superintendent of schools. In both cases, their boys were wrestlers, and good wrestlers. The other thing that I think is unique, and this is unique to our sport, is that in my 20 years of coaching, I coached 35 different families where 2, 3, or 4 brothers were wrestlers. 35 different families. You know, I don't know what to say about these Gibbons boys because I don't know what they're going to say about me, but I was wishing they went up first. But I do want to congratulate Jim and Joe on this induction. You know, this is the second time this week Jim has been inducted into some wrestling program or museum or whatever. In fact, on Saturday he was inducted into the International Wrestling Institute Museum in Newton, Minnesota. So this is old hat for him. You know, he's been through it a few times. You know, I want to just say that, of course, I'm so proud of these guys, and it was always an honor and a pleasure and a joy to be able to tell my friends that the Gibbons boys were my nephews and tell them about what their accomplishments were. And you know, these 2 guys, of course, were All-Americans and everything. And you know, they're All-Americans off the mat. That's what's impressive. They're not only great wrestlers, but off the mat, I mean, they're top-notch and top shelf and just great. And you know, there's 2 more Gibbons boys here that aren't being honored, but of course, they weren't chopped liver, you know. The 2 other boys were in the state finals 4 times, and they won 3 state titles. So I'm sure you know all that. I'm sure you guys know these guys better than I do, as far as wrestlers go. But I'm just saying, I appreciate what kind of people they are off the mat. They're just tops. And of course, I mentioned my brother here. We were the athletes in the family. And I think without, Omer would agree to this, and wrestling was our ticket to a college education, to I had a 36-year teaching and coaching career, and now retirement is another stage, and I love it. And Omer, of course, went to Iowa State, and is, I don't know if I should say this, he's got his PhD and teaches in Central Missouri State University. He's still Omer to us, but some people call him Dr. Omer. And so that's Omer, and his wife, Shirley. Where are you at, Shirley? Oh, you did. Hi. You know, these 2 guys were classmates also. They were in the same class, just like we were. And then his two boys were state champion wrestlers in Missouri. Well, I don't know, I think I've covered about everything I wanted to say. You sound like you're losing your steam. Thank you again for this, for being here, and thank you for this award. I appreciate it. Have a safe trip. Thank you.